In our series of bios, we've done figures like Adolf Hitler and Winston Churchill, who were more famous from World War II, although they did a lot as well during the First World War. And you've asked for more of those. One World War II general in particular, Erwin Rommel. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to a Great War special episode of Who Did What in World War I, today featuring the man who would one day be known as the Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel. Erwin Johannes Eugen Rommel was born November 15, 1891 in Heidenheim, a small town in the German kingdom of Württemberg. His father, Erwin Sr., a former artillery officer, was a school teacher and administrator, and his mother, Helen von Lutz, worked in the local government council. Erwin had a sister and two brothers, and he was described as a blonde, pale boy with a quick mind and with one distinctive trait: he wasn't afraid of anybody. Young Erwin was fascinated with aviation, then in its infancy, and he wanted to work in the Zeppelin factories in Friedrichshafen, but his father pressed him to join the army. He applied in 1910 and was initially told, "In foreseeable time, no new men were needed." Ironic. He did eventually find service in a local infantry regiment, and in 1911 was sent to the Prussian School of War in Danzig. After taking his exams, he rose to lieutenant and returned to his infantry regiment, serving as platoon leader until the war began. Rommel's regiment became part of the 13th Württemberg Army Corps under General von Fabeck and part of the German 5th Army under Crown Prince Wilhelm, and it saw action shortly after the outbreak of hostilities. As the German offensive, using the Schlieffen Plan, rolled through Belgium in its sweep towards Paris in August 1914, the 5th Army was at the pivot point on the wheel, and it was tasked with tying down the French army at the frontiers while the right wing crashed into northern France. It was here that Rommel had his baptism by fire. German and French forces advanced towards each other near the town of Longwy. Rommel led an advance group of his platoon, himself and 3 other men, on a reconnaissance mission. As they approached the village of Bled, and as the sun went down, he saw a French platoon sitting in the open having a coffee break. Now, Rommel could either go back and get his platoon or do what he did. His 4 rifles opened fire on the enemy and caused them to disperse. Only then did Rommel go and get his platoon, and with hand grenades and close combat rifle fire, they successfully stormed the village. The battles at the frontiers would last for weeks, with Rommel always at the front lines in spite of exhaustion. He ordered his men to better protect their shelters and dig their trenches deeper, and his motto, "Shed sweat, not blood," would follow him for life. He was wounded in an attack west of Yametz, which went as follows. "Once again we rushed the enemy in the bushes ahead of us. I saw 5 Frenchmen firing from the standing position. Instantly, my gun was at my shoulder. 2 Frenchmen dropped to the ground as my rifle cracked. I was still faced by 3 of them. My rifle misfired. There was no use thinking of escape. The bayonet was my only hope. I had acquired considerable proficiency. Even with odds of 3 to 1 against me, I had complete confidence in the weapon and in my ability." The wound, a leg wound, would put him out of action until January 1915. He returned as a company commander in the Argonne and fought there for the next 9 months, further enhancing his reputation as a brilliant strategist. After that, he was transferred to the Royal Württemberg Mountain Battalion, a newly formed unit that was the absolute elite of the German army. These men were the proto-Stormtroopers, trained in small unit tactics and over just about any terrain, and combining light infantry and machine gun companies. At the end of the year, he was sent to the Vosges to put his new skills into play. His men acted mostly as raiding parties, and Rommel was known to lay for hours in no man's land, watching and searching for any weak points in the defense where he could either outflank them or put his machine guns to work. Then he'd wait for fog or stormy weather and have his men come out and cut the barbed wire and jump into the enemy lines. At the end of 1916, and this is something you'll see later in our regular episodes in great detail, of course, Rommel was again transferred, this time to take part in the German offensive into Romania. This was very different from the stalemate of the Western Front. The war in Romania was one of movement, observation, perseverance, subterfuge, and sudden violent attacks. Rommel was in his element. It was on this front that stormtroops really came into their own. Rifle and machine gun companies worked together flexibly and restructured and strengthened each other when the battle demanded it, and they needed an officer like Rommel who would lead them from in front. The climax of the campaign was at Mount Kozna, where Rommel's men advanced upon the mountaintop and stormed it without artillery or mortar support. After that battle, Rommel was on leave for several weeks and toured the Baltic with his wife, Lucia, whom he had met during his officer training in Danzig and married in November 1916. When Rommel returned to active duty that month, his corps was sent to the Italian front. The Bolshevik Revolution had quieted the Eastern Front, but the Italians were still a big threat. In fact, they'd occupied Gorizia and were near to taking Trieste, where things were looking grim for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. German High Command was forced to send 7 divisions to the Isonzo River to start an offensive to hopefully relieve the Austrians. Rommel's men were tasked with taking the Italian artillery positions on the high mountain slopes of the Kolovrat Ridge, a daunting task. Yet they did it, silencing outposts and taking over 1,000 prisoners even under heavy resistance. By nightfall, they had occupied Yevzchek, and Rommel's superior, Major Strusser, seeing the huge number of prisoners, gave the order to retreat, thinking they'd already been successful. Rommel ignored the order, as he was allowed to do in certain cases according to German command structure. And with just 100 men and 6 machine guns, he advanced on the heights of Monte Matajur, and when his men eventually opened fire, they were the only ones firing. The Italian defenders surrendered. In 52 hours of climbing, marching, and fighting, Kampfgruppe Rommel had taken over 9,000 prisoners. They had lost 6 men killed and 30 wounded. Rommel was honorably mentioned for his actions there, and weeks later was awarded the Pour le Mérite, the highest Prussian military honor. Now, it was very uncommon for a mere lieutenant to win such an award. In Italy, you could really see how effective the training for the German elite forces was, and also how Rommel tried to endanger his men as little as possible. He would one day tell his son, "If you want to live as a hero, you foremost have to survive." He spent the last few months of the war as a staff officer and was reunited with his men in December 1918. It would be more than 2 decades before he would step onto another battlefield. And we know from movies, television, books, and more just how legendary he would become on those future battlefields. Here's the thing. My grandfather on my mother's side was British, and he fought in World War II in the Royal Air Force in North Africa. Now, to be clear, as a general rule, both of my grandparents hated Germans till they died, but not Rommel. And when I was a kid and Grandpa told highly edited stories about the war, Rommel was an enemy, but he was never a bad guy. And you could see why, because Grandpa, and by extension all of Rommel's enemies, had nothing but respect for the Desert Fox, his daring, and his strategic brilliance. This held true not just in World War II, but even in the later stages of the Great War. If you want to read some first-hand accounts from Erwin Rommel himself, check out his book Infantry Attacks in our Amazon store. And if you're interested in his actions in the Argonne, you can check out our episode about that right here. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.